Thank you to all of you for making the time. Thank you in particular to those who are in the halls outside. We hope that we might have you meet with our panelists once this is over. We'll do about 60 minutes, and then we'll have questions. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time, and thank you to BIC. We'll begin with a question to the author, to Aruna Roy, on her reflections and what she thinks of the change, if any, that has come since the 4th of June and the results.
Well, before I go on to the 4th of June, I think I'll very like to briefly to say why this book came out in May and not in April. Despite my best efforts with Harper to get this book out before the elections, it didn't come out. For whatever reasons, it's come out after the elections. And this book itself, I thought, would start many conversations with people, especially with young people who have been born after 2000, to start trying to understand the politics of India. After the 4th of June, I think we have a little space to breathe. But despite that, all the things we don't want, many things we don't want, are still happening. And I think activists apart, there's something called civil society. And I think what's happened is that civil society has lost its nerve in the last 10 years. And it stopped responding as quickly as it would have before. There are many things that have happened for which civil society should speak out. I can give you half a dozen examples, but that would take too much time, so I won't say that, including communal incidents, including anti-democratic governance. There have been so many issues on which we should really have spoken out, and I do make a distinction between activists and civil society. And I think activists are visible. They are people who are targeted, who are called urban Nakshals. They are called Andolan Jivis. There are many names by which we are called. But civil society is more faceless and quiet. And I think for a democracy, civil society must speak out. But before, I don't know whether you want me to say something about the book now, Akar, or later?
Well, you can. I suppose I can ask you a question and you can take off from there. It is a remarkable book, and I was spending most of today going through it. And it is part memoir, part reflection on the work that she has done over the decades, part history, not only of the MKSS and the work she's done there and that they have done there, but also of India and the transition into some of the laws and some of the policies that we've seen being brought to bear in the last 20 years, including the right to food, the RTI, Manrega, and so on. My question is, you write about the history of the phrase, the personal being political. Can you tell us something about the book through that phrase? What do you take to mean by those three words?
Well, you know, the thing is that there are two words, personal is political, but there is a third word, which is private. And in many of the discussions I've had, people have wondered why I've not talked more about the private world, but I think the private world should be private. I think personal and political are interlinked, because I think what happens to my personal life is often dictated to by political action, and political action is motivated by and stimulated by my personal reactions, my personal dilemmas, my personal angst, or my personal anger. So the two are interrelated, and therefore the story of most of activists' lives is an interlacing of the personal and the political, because after all, the motivation comes from a very personal reaction to injustice, personal reaction to poverty, personal reaction to grief, personal reaction to all the hundreds of things that happen in and around us. And that's what makes us respond. And because everyone feels the same, I'm sure there's nobody in this room who hasn't felt upset about injustice, upset about anything. The only difference between people who don't act and who are called civil society and the rest of us who are called activists is that the activist really acts. So the action that we get into depends on multiple variations. And in this book, I have traced how the idea of service itself changes, how the idea of looking for structures changes, and how you look for service in a structure and it turns out to be completely formatted on career building, and then you leave it, then you go somewhere else, and then you understand that it's not just development, it's also struggle. So you get out of that and you get into struggle. So there is these variations that happen to us. So personal is political all through in many ways. One or two stories from the book. People nowadays, and just the other day, there's been a communal incident in Udaipur. So communal incidents are there all around us now, and we are ruled now by a BJP government in Rajasthan. People accuse us of, when we talk about secularism or about equality of religions, we are projected into a stereotyped mold, and we are told we belong to a certain category of people who are this way or that way. There are millions of ways in which we are described. I won't go into that. But what made me, for instance, react so sharply to communal issues? I was born over the cusp of independence. I was literally in Delhi from the age of 4 months. I saw partition. I saw Gandhi. I didn't see him, but I was in an area very close to where he was assassinated. There were all these things. For me, it's my life. It's not history. So one of the reasons why this personal is political is because if you talk about your life, you're really talking politics. You're talking about partition and what happened to you and what you saw. It is really politics. And I think in my long association with young people nowadays, I find that if I tell the story of what happened to me at partition, I have more takers than if I give a theoretical analysis of partition or of communal behavior. So one of the reasons why this book got written like this was because when you see how the personal becomes political, and there's a story in this book where I talk about how at the age of, I was not even 2, when there was a killing very close to where I lived in Delhi, and there was a Rampuri topi, which I saw. And I heard the shrieks, and my mother just bundled me away. She didn't want me to see anything else. But somehow in my mind, that Rampuri topi was associated with unhappiness and with violence. And a few years later, when they took me to Bombay, and we got off at Bombay Central, I saw the same Rampuri topi on an elderly gentleman, and I couldn't be consoled. I screamed and said, save him, take him away, they'll kill him. And ultimately, my mama and my mother had to take me to the old man, and he had to pacify me, saying, look, nothing is going to happen to me. So the politics arises from a very deep personal involvement, concern, a set of images. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And after that, you build. Structurally, you build. Theoretically, you build in terms of public action. But somehow the stimulation doesn't. So the accusation that's flung at us all the time, as if we have come, we have stereotyped into looking at things in a manner in which we stigmatize another group, is all, for me, nonsense. So the personal is political, and for women, everything personal is political. Our demand for equality, for a cup of milk like my brother would have, is political. That I want to cycle is political. That I want to dress the way I want to is political. That the way now, even today, that I want to marry whom I want to is political. So how is politics any far from my life? Every single personal activity of mine is political.
It's quite remarkable how you've woven your feminism into the chapters. You write at one point words to the effect that when you were growing up, and there's a reference at that point to the Beatles, so this must be in the 60s, Gandhi, the shadow of Gandhi's sacrifice meant that there was still tolerance in our part of the world. Saying in some sense that those were more tolerant times for free speech than the ones that we live in. Could you sort of expand on that a little more?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that we could stand on boat club lawns in Delhi and say what we wished. Today, boat club lawns are at some kind of forbidden area from which we are locked out. But for us, it was part of the space we had to say what we liked. We mixed with politicians. Shankar's international competition used to take place in the boat club lawns. We met Jawaharlal Nehru, I met Rajendra Babu, I met so many people, Humayun Kabir, Maulana Azad, who came to this children's competition and had a look at it. So there was a mingling, if you like, between power and non-power. There was a mingling between people and people who represented power, but also there was so much freedom. You had the case of Indira Gandhi, and people could say anything they wanted about her. The opposition could file a case, they won the case, she was ousted from power. The point is that there was a possibility, even we can talk about that emergency and our current undeclared emergency, if you like. But at that point, freedom of speech was not curtailed. And I remember I've been seeing old Shankar's weekly cartoons where he's so sarcastic about Nehru and some of the things he said. If you did that to our present holders of power, you'd be in jail overnight. But all those things were allowed. There were so many things you could criticize, you could write, you could talk about it. Papers were full of criticism of the power elite, of the government. Music could be different. You could sing anything. You could write anything. I'm not saying it was paradise. There were still atrocities. The Dalits were still treated very badly. Women were treated badly. There was shortage of freedom in many areas. But articulation was not. I never thought that I couldn't say anything as a child. I wasn't afraid that if I did a cartoon in one of the social media, there was no social media then, but wherever, that I'd go to jail like those two girls did in Bombay. Unthinkable. And somehow I think that generation has ceased to be vocal. And I think one of the problems with the present political scenario is that those who are alive are very quiet. And for the younger generation, they haven't probably understood that such things are completely unacceptable to India. I don't know what it is. You and I are on the same page there. But there was more freedom, I think.
One last question before we move to the others. Since you have been a participant and an observer, do you think that this shift happened gradually over 50 years, or was there a moment where something clicked? I'm trying to understand whether we have deteriorated because of the passing of one man whose lessons we have left to history and no longer go back to, or was it something else in society?
There's never a question of one man, as you all know and as I know. It's just that Gandhi's assassination stunned us into silence. The fact that such an important human being and a pacifist and somebody whom we thought had led us into freedom could be just annihilated, I think stunned us into silence. So the demand for religious aggression receded into the background. But I'm afraid in those 40 years of not real peace, but a kind of peace that we bought with his death, didn't give us the wisdom to create a different discourse on religion, a different discourse on politics that would make sure that no extreme religious discourse would ever take over this country. We all retreated into our little worlds of wanting to better ourselves, or politics became a dirty word. I mean, there were so many things that happened. I can't really tell you in 5 minutes what happened. But there were so many things we didn't do in those 40 years. And so when Ayodhya happened, we were really taken aback. Nobody dreamt that the masjid, the Babri masjid, would be brought down. In fact, till the day it happened, I wouldn't have believed, I did not believe that the Babri masjid would be brought down in India. And I thought, this can't happen in this country. How can we, Indians, do this? It just can't happen. It's just a threat. But it didn't happen. And why did it happen is a question we have all been answering ever since. But before I give up what I have to say, I just want to make two or three things about the book, which are very important to me, if I may. One is that I've been talking to young people for the last 15 years, and I find that there are many reasons why we have not been able to communicate with them, especially those whom we call ourselves the liberal left, or the liberal people, or the liberal Democrats, or the people with compassion. We haven't been able to appeal to them because we don't talk in their language. We don't use words they understand. Even if they speak English, they don't understand our English. They don't understand the method in which we talk to them. And I'm not talking about young, very young people, very well-informed people whom I know, who are like me. I'm talking about the other. I'm talking about the other. And then I realized that you have to write, even if you write English, and many of them have now become English literate, a language which is simple, a language which is, they kept saying to me, every second page of anything you all write, we have to go to the dictionary, we have to refer, we have to go to reference books. It's very difficult reading. So I thought, oh, perhaps it's the way it is. And then I realized that we write an English that's complicated, and it should be a simple language. I also realized as a woman that we need independence to write the kind of language that we want. And I remember reading Virginia Woolf and being so excited by the right to a language. And I just quote 2 lines from this book, that the relationship of a woman to language is as intriguing as a relationship with her body. We begin with a fear of expression. Even now, I mean, you all see me as power, but even today when I sit with a bunch of men, I have to plead for or persuade them or be aggressive about the way I speak or what I think is important, because women and the way we speak still has the feminine form of expression still is not equal. So there's one thing about our language. And so we are seen as a threat. When language comes in, where language is not aggressive, where language is persuasive, where language is different, I think we form a threat. And I don't know, this book is sort of kind of explored it in action to tell you exactly what it's all about. So that's something. And communication is forever the most important thing in an activist's life. If we do not communicate, how can we motivate? How can we organize? So it's extremely important, and communication as life as language, as activism, is very often not looked at. Culture as communication. And for me, this book has been a very important tool to communicate beyond the kind of theoretical frame in which we all live, but also talk about the ways in which you can communicate, in which things get taken far ahead of us. And dialogue and conversations are very important. And I thought, if you say you know everything, there's no one who's going to enter into a dialogue with you. You have to be strong enough to talk about your vulnerabilities. You have to be strong enough to say, this thing needs more discussion. This thing needs more talking. And I think in this book there has been an attempt to say that these are not resolved issues, that these are not the end of conversations, but it's the beginning of many conversations. And so there is no conclusion in this book to many things. But there are issues with mutual concern, great concern, in which it invites a dialogue, a conversation, and a going ahead.
That's what I thought as well, that it leads one to reflect a lot, and while there might not be conclusions, it resolves many things by a chapter. And that's what I took from the book. Deepa, what did you think of the book, and can we have your reflections on it, please?
I'm deeply moved by this book. And while reading the book, I have had to put it down many times because I felt I couldn't go further. It's a stunning work written with remarkable self-restraint and a profound self-awareness. The kind of honesty that one sees in this book is really hard to digest and hard to come by in our times. For someone like Aruna, who's put in 5 decades of work in activism, the book could have easily and naturally been about her, how she made it, about strategy, about success, etc. But the book is a work of reflection, of profound self-inquiry. And as I said, it's a continuous process of self-denial. A self-renunciation marks the entire book. The framework of this memoir is a kind of a quest, something that does not end with the book, as Aruna just said. When Aruna decided to work with people, life takes her to unknown geographies, unknown cultures, unknown language. She's moved by the struggles, their difficulties, but it's never from the position of this city-bred, middle-class, all-knowing, educated, former IAS, but of someone who wishes to be a co-traveler. In this book, she takes us on with her on this arduous journey and draws our attention to these remarkable people, a variety of people. She introduces you to a variety of people, unsung heroes, who with their robust conviction, a very strong sense of good, bad, right, wrong, continue with their struggles in the letter and spirit of the Indian Constitution. And throughout this narration, Aruna reminded me of this great Kannada writer, the Jnanpith Award-winning writer, Shivram Karanth. Shivram Karanth in his life was many things. He was a writer, he was a Yakshagana artist, he was a composer, he was an activist, he thought and wrote a lot about science, worked for children. But Karanth, in all his roles, said one thing. Karanth worked with this tribal group called Koragas in the Western Ghats. And the Koragas are, the practice is that they eat leftovers after there is an upper caste ceremony. If there is a marriage in an upper caste home, the Koragas are standing at the gate, and when the plantain leaves are thrown out, they pick leftovers from the plantain leaves and eat. Karanth just could not bear this. And he pleaded to the Koragas and said, don't do this. But later on in his life, he said, you don't do activism for someone, do it with them. So he went with the Koragas wherever they went, and he made sure that they didn't pick leftovers. Aruna's life is very similar to that of Karanth's. She was there with them in Tilonia, in Devdungri, in remote villages of Rajasthan. She worked with them. She lived like them. And this is I don't even have the words to kind of capture this enormous life of activism that Aruna has led. So it's really a stunning work, the best that I've read in the recent times, and I urge that all of you must read this book.
Yeah, there is a great deal of modesty, and it's very lightly held. It's a book that can be read in the same way as one can read fiction. And the reason I'm saying this is that there is a simplicity to the narrative and elegance in the structure that only a very great writer might be able to bring to bear. Naipaul said that the writer's largest problem was material, that she didn't have enough experience in life to be able to bring to the pages. But here we've got one of the richest lives of our time, and to bring that material into these pages with such a light touch, it's an absolute joy to read. I really liked it. It's going to be one of the books that I keep going back to. Gautam Bhan, could you speak about your work, about the distance that many of us here, including myself, in the urban spaces feel from poverty, while we might be well-meaning, don't really necessarily connect with it, and how it is that links to the work that she has done and the book.
So I think now?
Yeah?
Now? Now. Okay. So I'll take the chance to do two things. I think one is to just reinforce once again about the form of the book. There's the point in it where Aruna says that women talk and think and argue differently, and rural women talk, think, and argue particularly. And there is the metaphor of the notion of an orality to the writing. Right? This is a deeply oral book. It feels very odd that it's written. It's strikingly, it meanders, it flows, half a thought stops. I can imagine her having picked up the pen because Nikhil brought in the tea. Then she's like, the next paragraph doesn't have to segue in any way. Now I'm thinking about this, right? And then you're back and it loops and it comes. Huh? This is also entirely possible, right? Something happened, some Jaroka came, some news alert came, and you can feel the interruptions in thought and the meanders back and it flows on and it comes back and it has no desire to police that orality. And I think I haven't come across a text recently where one of the first things she talks about is the way she heard stories when she went to Tilonia for the first time. And the book is written in the tone of that orality. And I think it's a remarkable way to read, in a really beautiful way. And so just to endorse and pick up and build on, I want to leave two arguments from the book, because we are all slaves to our training. And so that's what one does. And, that were very, very important for me. Both because Aruna has been one of my greatest mentors and teachers and friends as an activist. And one of the things that I think I have always thought about is the place of anger in activism. And anger is it's essential and it's impossible. And it's incredibly risky because it's never in your control. So it can start you and then it can consume you. And there are places in which Aruna repeatedly talks about the discipline of what you do with your anger. When I was younger, there used to be an email signature that said, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Okay? It's very popular in our college days. And the problem is if you're always outraged, then you're also not paying attention because the specificity vanishes, the particularity vanishes, the rigor vanishes. There's a line here I want to read. It says, an activist has to remember that personal anger and angst can destroy public action. The battles have to be rooted in compassion. And this idea of an anger that is not rooted in fear, but an anger that is rooted in compassion, is the beginning of then why, agar sab taj uchhalne hain, you can't recreate the same structures you fought. And so many movements in the contemporary times recreate the same power structures they sought to take down. And one of those is because we can't direct the anger. And to me, this is a story about how anger is essential and held and not denied and embraced, but also contained and directed and disciplined and in some ways directed. And I think the work of activism is very much that, and in multiple kinds of stories, because as you go through the book, the orality also, just like the stories of the women, hold an enormous amount of violence. And I have been to these places that she describes. When she describes the way in which caste operates in rural Rajasthan in the 70s, these are not negotiations. There are no seats at the table. There are no co-production participatory meetings. This is conflict. And so deep in structural social change that is rooted through conflict, how do you hold on to anger, but how do you not let it become who you are? And I think that's one of the arguments in the book that I think are just subtly laced. She never says this. This is 180 pages, one line, the argument is spelled out, right? So as the academic, I'm like, say it again. It's the, underline it. But as the reader of a story, I love that I realized I felt it all along. And I kept waiting for her to lose her patience and waiting for her to get mad and waiting for her to say, forget it, right? But at that time, Nikhil interrupts and she just leaves that train of thought and comes back. I thought of many other words to him, but I've never been on stage at BIC and I want to be invited back. So, the other point I want to say, and I'll stop with this, is the other thing I think that holds a lot of people back. The book is unabashedly normative in its values. It absolutely talks about what it believes. It does not defend it. It does not try and objectively nuance it. It says, this is my heart. This is what I believe. These are values I begin with. It is one of the least cynical texts I have read in a very long time. And I think one of the greatest things that we struggle with in the last period of time in India has taken from us, it's not, hopelessness actually is less dangerous to me. Cynicism is actually what breaks, to me, a kind of politics. Because hopelessness comes when you desperately want something and you feel like you can't get it. You can be in the trenches and wait it out. But when cynicism settles in, it becomes a very sophisticated indifference. Because you do a lot of work to remain cynical. Right? You continually tell yourself why. This is not the right strategy. This is not the right tactics. Right? Cynicism is both intellectual and emotional at the same time. And it's very dangerous. And in some ways, I feel like a certain sense of unabashed value-based idealism. This is what I believe, and I cannot tell you why, but it's in my bones. I'll be a little risky here, I feel like people are a little bit afraid to be unabashedly value-driven these days. We've got a lot of, and I think this is something that is partly out of a sense of frustration, hopelessness, but partly because hope is essential, but hope is terrifying. Cynicism is comfortable. It gives you exits, it gives you ways out, it gives you justifications, and it allows you to say, I'm not negative, I'm very progressive. What's the point? I'm cynical. And the question, this is my Aruna Roy oral history meandering way of answering your question about the urban. The urban allows you multiple pathways to cynicism. And it makes it very easy to do something that you should not be able to do, which is to unsee the hand in front of your face. It gives you multiple ways out. And there is a way in which, Indians have occupied cities very gingerly and very recently. We are not a people to whom the urban has been automatic. Mine is the first generation that doesn't necessarily trace itself. It's a classic story of you're riding a train somewhere and someone says, where are you from? You can't say Delhi. It doesn't matter how many generations are on. They're like, but you can't belong there, no? You cross the Vindhyas, you say, what is your native? Our native is not urban. We don't belong to cities. We come to cities, right? And this shift is happening now. So to me, the urban is actually a place where the kind of social contract that she describes is not present. We don't have an urban social contract in this country. We don't have a legitimate right of people to be in this country. There's a line that is there. She said, Aruna says, I went to the village where poverty still has a veneer of dignity. In our cities, poverty does not have a veneer of dignity. You want rights, you belong, Constitution will give them to you, take them in the village. Take Narega in the rural. Take the National Rural Health Mission. Take the National Rural Health Mission in the rural. When all our fellow citizens started walking hundreds of kilometers on highways, leaving our cities during COVID, risking every kind of death, right? Because it was their best chance to stay alive, there is nothing more to be said about the fact that we do not yet have a social contract in our cities. Our cities' notion of themselves as moral and political spaces is very fractured. But at the same time, because they're cities, they will never fit a single story. So some of this generation that is urban born, that claims itself, that has a notion of soil and jal, jungle, zameen, but concrete, sadak, pani, right? An equivalent, that language is emerging. So some of the things that also make me really deeply hopeful about new forms of politics is the fact that a new urban social contract is building, that people are fighting to save their homes against eviction, that people are coming to cities and claiming them, that you have younger people who say, we are Shehri, right? So if you think of the Kannada word Desha, right? A place where you belong. There are wonderful ethnographies of migrant women in Bangalore who say Desha is rural and Desha is urban. Don't think we are lost or out of place or migrated. We have built a Desha here. This is a new language, that you can belong to the city, that you can claim the city. And I think that the fact that a lot of the most articulate, new, exciting, powerful anti-caste movements are deeply urban. And there is a reason they are deeply urban, right? I think so I think the urban right now is giving us the constant duality cities always give. We don't have a ready-made language. We have to translate constitutionalism into the urban. We have to translate belonging. We have to translate Indianness. We don't have instinctive storytelling that, I don't know if a storytelling like this, the first texts that tell stories like this from cities are just coming. So to me, I think in a lot of ways, the work of the city is that that veneer of dignity will come when first even the presence and the right to be in the cities has to be built. This is the political challenge of our times in some ways, because we are going to urbanize. And we have a lot to learn from rural movements, but I think it is not coincidental that every one of these significant legislative victories were rurally started. And I think there is something to be said about that and to rethink those cities. And I hope that this is, when I read this book, what it charges me to do, what it gives me permission to do, is to refuse a cynicism that our cities cannot be reimagined as spaces of belonging, that these cannot be sites of Jal Jangal Zameen. And that's an extraordinary permission to be given from a text. It makes you very grateful as a reader.
Please do.
Krishna, I'll take 2 minutes. I'm just so hung on this book. I want to tell 2 stories because Gautam said poverty has dignity in the rural, and Aruna narrates 2 remarkable stories. One is of Papiya. Papiya, who visited their household during the months where vegetable was scarce in Rajasthan. And they cooked roti and dal. And every time Papiya came to their house on some pretext, they offered her, they asked her to eat with them. And Papiya always said, no, I've eaten. That's one story Aruna narrates. And the other story is of a little Punjabi boy, probably of her age, standing in Delhi with a wooden tray and selling something. And this is post-partition, and Aruna spots the boy and says, tells her mother, can we go buy something from him and help him? Like Aruna, there are a whole lot of people there and who, go to the boy and crowd him and say, can we help you? The boy takes the wooden tray and leaves the place. He says, no help needed. Aruna narrates these stories of dignity of the poor remarkably. The other thing about the book that I felt when I read the book is that how she remembers with such great clarity not only these stories, these experiences, but also how she felt at that point in time.
To the things that Gautam spoke of, anger, there's a point in the book where Aruna's facing an audience that's fully charged up, an audience of women, and she senses that if she accelerates that process, it might lead to violence. So what is it that the person does when faced an audience of such a sort? And I think that to the point on cynicism, I think that as all of us who've read the book and those of you who will read it, will see that to the basic middle class questions of, what should an individual do? How is it that the system can be changed? I think this book and this life offers us the answers. Krishna, I'll come back to that question I asked her as well. What are your reflections and feelings and thoughts on the 4th of June and what it means, given the last 10 years? And you are one of the very few people who are in the public domain and are vocal about things that usually activists are. Without meaning to run down anybody else, why is it that we are a society of this sort, and what leads you to do the kind of work that you do?
I'll start with this, okay. I think 4th of June is very important, not just in terms of how we felt at that moment or how we felt for a week after that, but the fact is the tone of the conversation has dynamically changed. And I think it has allowed for a freedom in the mind for a lot of people, even people who may have not until then expressed anything, or been part of petitions, or part of putting likes on whatever, Facebook or whatever. I think it's opened up a part of their mind saying, okay, I can speak a little bit, maybe even in a family WhatsApp group. That's important. You know, it's a very important thing. That many people told me, you know, WhatsApp groups have become silent now. I thought that's so fabulous. As a musician, silence is so important. I know it better than anybody in this room. And that's such an important thing. That if the violence that was perpetrated in WhatsApp group, and that's violence, let's not even call it anything else. It was violence and vulgarity. If that has reduced for whatever reasons, and it's opened a space for those who are unable to speak, or were hesitant, or were exiting, to even put out something that is within quotes, neutral, whatever that means, it means something has changed in the way a number of people who felt could say, or could be a dinner time conversation, to be able to use certain words, to not feel scared saying that we are secular. I mean, people are really scared to use that word as if it's some foul language. Now I feel these things matter. And this is a long-term impact. But I think that we have some work to do. A space is being opened up. What are we going to do with that space? And I'm not talking about political parties. I'm talking all of us here, activists or not. What are we going to do with that space? How are we going to engage in that conversation? And I think what Aruna said there is very important. What's the vocabulary of that conversation? And I think we have to think about that. What's the language of that conversation? You know, and what are we going to talk about? How are we going to discuss these very dissed words today? How are we going to retrieve them? Or even rediscover them, or reimagine them? I think there is a lot of work to be done to find that dialogue to move ahead in whatever space each one occupies or lives in or participates in. And a lot of small things matter much more than one big thing. And I think June 4th was a big thing, but there are a lot of small things that we have to do. And that's why it's a participatory democracy. These are the small things we should be doing. So I think it is, for a lack of another word, an opportunity. And we have to think about how we're going to participate in this opportunity that's being offered. By us for ourselves. Let's remember, we gave ourselves that opportunity. No one gave that to us. And that's magnificent by itself. So what are we going to do post that day in the ballot box or the announcement on June 4th? I think I'll leave it at that. You know, Aruna and I share something that I can very confidently say no one else on the panel does, is we are a few decades apart, that's about it. But that kept aside, we share what I will call socio-cultural ambience. In the way she grew up, in the environment that she had, and even musical ambience to some sense. And so I kind of connect with her in a manner that's very different. In the manner of what you see, what you hear, imageries of notions of beauty, notions of grandeur in art, so many of these things. And I think that's an interesting connection to make. Because with the connection comes the baggage of the connection. It comes with a lot of unsaid things. And many times people misinterpret or misunderstand the role of these images, and I'm using images generically, sonic images too, in our lives. And we don't think that's part of our political discourse or part of our social discourse. We kind of, put that separately. I've met so many, within quotes, activists who will talk about equality, caste, gender, everything. But then if you just turn the conversation to, say, preferences of art, and then ask complicated questions of why don't you feel the same way when you hear something else? This gender, caste, everything will be thrown out. I just like that better. There's no critical thinking of how those imageries are part of a social discourse, of a social habituation. And I think that's something that I share, that struggle, if I can use that word. I share with Aruna, because how does one hold on to the kernel of an aesthetic experience or experiences and see value in that kernel, believe in that, and believe there is something truly profound in that, and yet be able to say, all the rubbish that is built around that needs to be deconstructed. And furthermore, how does one realize it's the rubbish around it that makes it impossible for us to actually touch the kernel? That's very hard. It's not at all easy. And I think it is sometimes, Aruna may correct me, we probably will argue about this later, but it may be harder for the receiver, if I can use that word, than for the person who's on stage. I think it's harder for the receiver, because the receiver, the production of art, like production of anything, comes with a hierarchy of reception. Okay? And I am at the higher position of that hierarchy. The receiver knows that the person is a receiver. And therefore, you're accepting so many things when you receive, you don't even see beyond it. And there are some people who don't want to see beyond it. So what happens there, to be able to say, my goodness, this music or this dance changed me as a receiver, and they say, no, I want to go beyond that, is very hard, because you don't want that change to be lost. When you're making it, there is a lot of backroom work happening, which gives you an avenue to at least look in that manner, because it's 24 hours work, right? So I think so for me, I mean, how she has been able to realize multiple realizations, actually. I'm taking off the book and I'm also including some conversations we've had. How she's able to realize that this notion of beauty, another thing we don't talk in the world of activists. How can we not discuss this notion of beauty? Because that is at the bottom line of our every feeling, including caste, including gender. The first line of its impact is what you see, what you hear. How is the person dressed? How is the color of the skin? It's notions of beauty. And we don't discuss that enough. And I think that's what makes Aruna fascinating. Because she's able to bring that in to a very hardcore, nuts and bolts activist work, right? Rights work. I mean, who would think rights work and beauty has any connection, right? So I think for her, to be able to shift that paradigm of beauty and realize that it's actually not about beauty. Art and experience is actually never about beauty. It's about something else. The veneer is beauty or the lack of it, depending on where you stand. And for her, able to traverse this various notions of imageries, of sounds, and find profound learnings from it. Another thing about this book is Aruna remains a student. That is something that we all can learn from. Right through the book, Aruna is receiving. And the thing about learning is you must want to learn. You're never going to learn otherwise. And after a point, none of us want to learn. Why the hell do we want to learn? We know. And to be open to it, and that comes with internal resistance. To want to learn is always resisted by us. Internally, there's a struggle. Because when we learn, we are also unlearning something we believe in, most of the times. It challenges something that you believe or you understood, and you pick up something, the first instinctive human reaction is to block it away. To be able to go beyond it and receive something wholeheartedly, and do that repeatedly through your life, is something that's quite remarkable. And I think that's what has helped her in also navigating this space of beauty, of culture, of art, and seeing the intersections, and seeing that the sounds of Rajasthan, the sounds of Kalakshetra, I mean, two sounds that the twains would never meet. but to be able to be critical of both sounds, by the way, she's not uncritical about the rural world or the rural social fabric, Because that's also a very, very dangerous upper caste thing to do, right? And then you're scared to be critical. That's the other thing. How does a person who belongs to upper caste, family, progressive, whatever, but still belong to that kind of environment, how does that person navigate the world of social activism? I think Aruna's life is definitely a great example of that. I think it's because the big difference between her and me is that I'm a man and she's a woman. That's a huge difference, and we're 60 years apart. I am. Thank you for confirming it. but you know, so I think that's also very, very important, that she gives us a way to be constantly awake, constantly aware. And it's actually such a beautiful process. Now, to your next question, I know I didn't answer that question. Why you don't find, if I remember right,
Just the fact that there are so few people like you around with holding the sort of profile you do and what it is that you tend to be engaged in.
because we're a caste feudal society. I mean, that's a simplistic answer, but I think that plays a huge role. There is still a huge feudal mindset.
So I'm trying to hold on to my community.
One. Other thing is you're always see yourself, especially if you, I mean, this is not necessarily true of people who belong to various marginalizations. We're talking about people with privilege here. So let me qualify who we are discussing here. Because they have to always shout, otherwise never heard. Their life is about being on the street. Because if they're not on the street, not screaming, not giving slogans, not singing songs, not dancing, nobody cares a damn about what's happening, right? Now, the ones with privilege have always felt that they have they need somebody with benevolence on top of them. It could be the king, it could be the zamindar, it could be a bureaucrat, it could be a corporation, it could be anybody. So you always see yourself as a service provider. The moment you see yourself as a service provider, you cannot speak. Because you're always worried that your service contract is going to be terminated. Or your community is going to make sure that that contract is terminated. The moment you live in that kind of a mental state, it's impossible for you to be free of anything. Freedom of degrees, even if you take freedom as notions of degrees of freedom and not absolute, there's very little you're able to negotiate. So everybody kind of, also remember that in the privileged world, status quo is not a problem. That's a very important point. That status quo is not a big problem. I mean, all our lives are going to go on fine. Nothing major is going to change. So once I'm at a status quo level, and status quo is not economic, it's socio-cultural, which I'm discussing, then why do I need to open my mouth and destroy status quo when I am good at this place, is what I think, unfortunately, we still have ingrained in our head. And probably, this is just an hypothesis, probably this is one of the reasons why you don't hear enough people who are in positions of power, who can speak. I think this is his role in this.
To the point on beauty, I think it's a century ago that Premchand, when he was speaking at the Progressive Writers founding, his line was that husn ka mayar badalna hoga. We'll have to change how we see beauty, and we need to perhaps let go of the Persian ideas of the rose and the flower and the garden, and come to the sweat and the laborer. May I ask Aruna, and then we'll go to the audience, the motivation that brought you to Tilonia when you're in your 20s, you've spent half a dozen years in the IAS, of which you write about as well. Is it the same motivation that keeps you going today? What is it that how is it that you engage with the world around you? And in what way is it different for you than it was in the 70s?
Well, the search is the same, let me say. the search is the same, in the sense that the values have not changed. My internal values remain the same. What does happen, of course, is that by your understanding a reality better, the solutions change, the path changes, in your choice of tools change, choice of issues change. And then, since I do believe very strongly, and that's something that in this book, which has given me a bit of a problem, is that I've lived a collective world, and this book really forced me into using the first person singular. It was very difficult for me. Actually, to shift from we to I was very tough, because it's been a life lived with the we. And one of the most important things I learned when I first came to rural India, that if you do not shift from the I to the we, there are no solutions. Now that belief has sustained me, because there are always ways ahead. If you sit down and state your problem in front of a group of people who live it, they have ways in which they think they can improve. They understand the reality much better than I do. Like, for instance, my friend Northi. If it hadn't been for her, whom I befriended in the late 70s and early 80s, I wouldn't have understood the basics of Dalit strengths, of Dalit freedom, the Dalit constraints of a woman who's born a Dalit. Tremendous potential to learn, tremendous potential to act. She's my peer. The understanding that I can find my peer in morality, in understanding the ethics of public life, understanding choices, and yet differing. Because she and I still would have great differences, and she says to me in Hindi, "Arey bhai, tum apne jagah raho, main apne jagah rahungi," lots of times. But yet at the same time, we share a common moral worldview. We share a common angst about inequality. We share a common angst about caste. But if I need to find a solution there, much more than in the late, when I went in the mid-70s to Rajasthan, I was still immature about the understanding of collective work and collective minds and collective solutions. But today you can't shake me from that path. And I find that if you really get yourself into a collective, there are ways ahead. There have been such difficult moments. I don't need to share them with you. Post 2014, even pre 2014, there have been very, very difficult times. In the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which has come to be my home, my political and moral home, if you like, every single issue is discussed and every single issue is debated and contested, argued, but there has to be some kind of common consensus before we act. And that process has been invigorating. And I'm still part of that process. So that process of ethics, of honesty, of public action, and of being, to a certain extent, pragmatic. You know, we come with this idea of revolution. One little story, if I may share with you. Nikhil and I and Shankar had gone to a village in Gujarat on the Narmada, a small village called Choti Gendra, where we had gone with tremendous ambitions that we would really start working there, which never happened. We came to Rajasthan finally. It was romantic, it was so beautiful. There were these lovely tribal houses, there were the rivers, the tributaries to the Narmada. And we sat up all night arguing, I remember. This friend of ours called Khem Raj, who's no longer alive, he was there and we went to see him and we thought we'd work with him. And there was no place to stay. So he was living in the house of a teacher, actually the classroom. The teacher occupied the big classroom and we occupied the smaller classroom. Children all studied under the tree. That's how life was in Choti Gendra. So one night we were arguing about all kinds of things. And teacher got fed up with us. He came in at about 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, can't your revolution stay till the morning? Do you have to resolve everything tonight? So revolutions never get either patterned or concluded in one night. So work is complex. If you really want to change India, it's complex. At the same time, it's very simple and practical. How do you wed the simple and practical to the larger complexities has produced RTI, has produced MGNREGA, the right to food. So many of these things that have come from this impossible marriage between the big and the small. And that, so long as it exists, there's always a way out. Small little things like, what can you do about this communal divide that has come between us? There are always possibilities. And though one is full of upset and angst at the kind of tragedies that are occurring, I think one has to see possibilities. And that's the optimism I wanted to share with you all in this book. Because a community that suffers sees optimism. Who am I to be cynical? Who am I to think of it in negative terms? I must therefore understand that person and assist that person. That's my role in life.
What a life. We set great store by the word outcome, but to see what it is that a small group of individuals can do in a part of the world where change is especially difficult to bring about. Please read this book. We'll take questions and comments from the audience. We'll start with the woman there.
Hello everyone, my name is Pratiksha. My question is for Aruna ma'am. Ma'am quoted Virginia Woolf. I was very excited because she's my favorite author. So in the same book, actually, A Room of One's Own, she also says that, regarding writing, she also says that writers should sort of go beyond the male and female binary in writing. So this is something that caught my attention. So when ma'am also quoted like her experiences of feminine writing. So I just wanted to ask if you agree with this, or if this is needed at all, or how do young writers go about doing this?
Thank you.
I'm unfortunately not a writer. I'm just a communicator. I hope you see the difference. Because I'm not really a writer. Someone says author, I look, oh, who's the author? I mean, I'm not an author. I'm just a communicator. This book is also born from a desire to communicate. Because I was hemmed in. As you can see, my hair is gray. When I was younger, I was running around in circles and wide distances to talk to people. And every day there was some other group, every day there was a newer audience, a different language in which you learned how to address. But as you grow older, those options shrink. And you want to communicate your ideas, you're desperate to disseminate your ideas. There's nothing but writing that you can do. So in a sense, I don't think there is a difference between a male author and a female author in absolute sense. But certainly, what Gautam described as my orality and my lack of conclusion to many of my ideas, leaving them mid-sentence maybe, or mid-idea maybe, and proceeding to others is very feminine. No male can ever bear, I think, the lack of logic. They need a conclusion. And in my life, I have always had to battle with my very good friends that, look, agendas are important, but processes are far more important. So if you look at a process and you argue for a process, then you're feminine, and that gets reflected in language. And I do think, if you read women writers and men writers, there is a different flavor to it. I don't think one is good and one is bad. I don't think one is better or one is worse. I don't even think that we have exclusively one style. We do make forays into the other style and come back. And even in this book, I had some points I really became, I wasn't writing like a woman, I was writing like a man. You do, because you're also conditioned. Your mind works like that. So I don't think these are watertight compartments. We keep going one to the other. But it depends very much on what you want to say and to whom you're talking, I guess.
Thank you.
Just 1 second. As a musician, if this happens to be male, I just register my protest as
Krishna always has something to
The
protest
lady
about.
there. And Sandhya, is there any way for us to get questions from the other halls as well?
There's one gentleman from the other hall inside who
Okay.
has a question.
Just to quote from the book to keep
Akash.
it alive in the
Sorry.
room, there is also a line in the book that I really love, which is that democracy is not made by laws but by processes. So this idea of the process is a repeated refrain in the
Yes. The woman here and
Hi. Oh, sorry. My name is Shadila, and thank you so much for the lovely conversation. I came to this talk because of the title, Political and Personal, to maybe help me answer something or think about something which I struggle with, which is friendship. I think at this age, being where I'm from, right? I'm from Bangladesh. I live between the Netherlands and India, and I feel like I really, really struggle in my friendships and the requirement or the hope or the things that I need in it. And I kind of wanted to know how you approach it. Yeah, thanks.
You know, my husband is from Bangladesh originally. In the sense that his family used to, they settled down in Kolkata for a long time, but they came from Bangladesh. I've been to Dhaka 3 or 4 times. You might think I'm mad, but when I went to Dhaka, I felt I was in Bengal. I didn't feel I was in a foreign country. We share so much culture. We share, and there were great arguments about how the best Rosh Malai or the Rasgulla was made in Dhaka and not in Kolkata. There were arguments about, for instance, that Rabindranath Tagore is ours, he's not yours. In a sense, I think these divisions are so arbitrary. We have to accept them, the national boundaries. Friendships don't have to be defined by your nationality in any sense whatsoever. Khushi Kabir, who's a very eminent social activist in Dhaka, is a very good friend of mine. She wears a bindi bigger than mine, actually, when she wears a bindi. Now, what are all these differences? In a sense, friendships are not defined by either your nationality nor by any of the other parameters that are used formally to distinguish us. I think the book talks a lot about friendships, actually. And my life has been made by the extraordinary number of friends I've had of very different sorts. From Dr. S. Anand Lakshmi, who is director of Lady Irwin College, older than I. From Shona Ray, who was a painter and a designer and who had very strong opinions and who actually started the first written campaign against the emergency at that time, to Sharda Jain, who's now 92 and writes to me every fortnight and sends me a very, very complex and erudite piece on some aspect of life that concerns her, whether it's ethics or whether it is education or whatever. Wonderful people and women, and likewise many men, Bichi, Komalda, so many people. So I really don't think you should be worried. Just make the friends. And the rest just follows. Don't worry about who are they and where are they from. It doesn't make any difference. But one has to fight these national boundaries. And now with what's happening in Bangladesh, I don't quite know how to take it. And I don't know what further problems there will be between Bangladesh and India, or will they be or not be there. That politics I'm not very aware of. But why worry about it? Just let's be friends first, and things sort themselves out.
Was there a question from the other hall?
Good evening. I'm Vijay from a small group in Bangalore called Socialist Forum. I see in India many good people, right-thinking people, Gandhians, Ambedkarites, Marxists, and other school of thoughts. But I see lack of coordination among them. Young people get together very less. I think we should do something for that, to bring together and take the message, whatever we learn from the books like Aruna Roy's, to the young people and see that they raise their voice for the country and democracy. Thank you.
Would you like to answer that? How is it that disparate groups can mobilize better?
If I had the answer to that, I would do it. Anyway, we've all tried. We've all tried. At so many levels we've tried. Issue-based mobilizations, organizational interactions, bringing people together. I can see faces in front of me who have tried it. I think at the ideological level, what really does not let us come together is ego and the fact that we all want our identities to be paramount. Who's going to lead? Am I going to lead or someone else is going to lead? Who gets the name, the credit, the fame? If we got rid of that, long ago we would have been one. And I will just tell you a little story again about Prabhash Joshi, who used to be the editor of the Jansatta. He's a very big champion of the RTI. I think without him, the law would not have got made. He was a wonderful man. And I remember we had a huge congregation in Ferozshah Kotla grounds. Not grounds, behind the Ferozshah Kotla, of all, I can't remember the year, is it 2006 or 4 or early part of this millennium. And we were huge numbers of people there, and he stood up and he said in Hindi, if you don't mind, I'll say it in Hindi first, because it's so much more powerful in Hindi. He said, "Arey bhai, वो नेता लोग कुर्सी के लिए तो एक हो जाते हैं. ये आप जो लोग हैं, इतने ब्राह्मण हैं आप, और इतना छुआछूत करते हैं कि कभी एक नहीं होते हैं. तो आपका कोई स्वार्थ नहीं है क्या कि जिस पे आप एक हो सकते हैं?" So it's the same thing, we just get divided and subdivided into smaller and smaller groups. We hold on to things we won't give up. We just don't see the larger good. Now for that, I have no answers. I don't know if you have answers. The only solution to that is to keep trying to come to a common platform and try and look at things in a similar way, agree to disagree, and have a common small minimum agenda for which we all agree. We've tried that also, and that also failed. But anyway, let's keep trying. We just have to keep trying. There's no other answer I can give you today except it is a good ideal, it's something that should happen, and we should keep trying. How do we know it won't happen tomorrow? It may. So let's keep hoping that it will. And one of our biggest enemies is the market and the transactional relationships that have come in between us. It's seeped into every single kind of relationship we have. What will I get out of this? It's the first question. So somewhere we have to resolve that as well.
This side of the audience, perhaps, the lady here, Sandhya, right in front, third row, second row.
Good evening, Aruna ji. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. In your book, you say equality was a necessary value in our practice. How did you build gender and caste equality in rural Rajasthan? Because I report from rural India and I've done many stories from Rajasthan. So I really wanted to know this.
I think we don't build it actually. We just have to recognize the areas in which we can be equal. Building equality, equality itself is a very contentious issue. And discussion on that can take you anywhere, whichever way. Krishna? Yes? So that way, so the only thing is to live equality and to begin very simply that there is no untouchability, there is no superiority of thought. That I say because I think so, it's true and it's correct. You live the same way, you sleep the same way, you eat the same way, and from there is the beginning of equality. When you live equality that way, then you have the right in village society or any society to go and challenge those people who live unequally. But we also need the law. Again, an example from the book. When we were living in Devdungri, our home was open. I don't know. Many of you know about rural India, and I'm sure rural Karnataka is just the same. Everybody can look into everyone else's houses. There's no such thing as privacy. So Shankar's daughter once went to the well, and we all took water from a Dalit well. Dalit person owned the well. He could not say no to the OBCs. So they went and got water from that well. But the owner of that well could not touch our water pots. Imagine. What is the logic to all this? So Kamu, Shankar's daughter, went to fetch water. She couldn't lift the pot to her head. So she said to him, "Can you please help me?" So he did. In came an army of women saying, "Break the pot," because she has made that untouchable touch the pot. We had a huge fight. And there was no question of any kind words being exchanged by any one of us from this side or that side. There was abuse from their side. And finally, I became, and this is how our roles keep changing, and please understand that our roles are never static. I suddenly became an official. And I said to them that if you do any one thing further, I'm going to go to the police station and register a case under the atrocities law against you. And I told the woman who was leading it, and I said, you will be in jail and your whole family will have to go to Jodhpur to get bail. Remember that. And that kind of diffused the situation. Well, not only IAS, an activist coming up. Nikhil would have said the same thing. Shankar would have said the same thing. You know, you have to use that kind of authority. So I have no prescription. In other words, you have to use authority of the law, of legal systems, of knowledge of that law, but you also have to live equality. If you don't live equality, you have no moral authority to speak of it.
I just want to say one thing in addition to this, just thinking with it, is part of the thing also, I think, is we very often, and one of the things that the book does so well, is we seem to be very attracted to instances of heroism and a grand rebellion, right? But one of the things you get from reading this book, heroism is actually a sign of failure, because what it tells you is that the systems are failing. Because dignity should not require heroism. It should be ordinary. The banalest moment should offer it to you. So when we sort of take these spectacular cases of the fight back, right, you need them because you need the inspiration. But if you rely on them too much, you forget that most of the battles are the everyday. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about hierarchies like these, in a lot of cases in the urban, just to come from that point, the problem is that they're not even named as caste and gender battles. Right? They are proxied, they are hinted at, they become questions around property. You flatten, you strip this language. And part of the real violence of that is that violence is not even named as violence, right? And this is something that feminism picked up a long time ago. It is something that anti-caste scholarship emphasizes. The first step is to actually say, this is not violence that is not driven by a certain logic. And urban areas particularly have that slight to say, not here. This is a rural thing. This is a traditional thing. It's an older thing, right? There's an insidious nature in which these hierarchies operate. So I think part of the story also is what one of my teachers once said to me. They said the idea is not always for equality to win a certain number of fights. The idea is that you should sense that there are fights happening all around. Democracy is noisy, right? And when the noise goes away is when we should worry. It's not if we're winning the fight, it's can you hear the fight? Because if you're hearing the fight, then we're pushing. There's frictions, there's movements, right? I remember so clearly after the Delhi Nirbhaya case, there's a photographer called Lakshman Anand who takes a photo of a woman. She's wearing jeans and a black and white striped full sleeve sweater. It's Delhi winter. You can sense it in the sun in the photograph. She's climbed up this pole outside the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the photograph is she's shouting and she's flicking off the president's house, right? And for everything that I remember about the horror of that time, the thing that I remember was also the sound of the fight. Because that girl was saying, I will not choose between my safety and my freedom, and you will not make me. Right? So to me, a lot of the index of inequalities, they're not going to change so quickly. One of the things you learn in the book is when you fight a status quo in a system, it fights back. There's nothing romantic about this conflict-based social change where we, driven with the right values, are going to lead and then be welcomed. The status quo is a status quo for a reason. They are incredibly good at fighting back. It's what we tell our students all the time. Rise, but when you rise, have the sensibility to say, no one's going to welcome your revolution. So anticipate how the system will fight back. It will refuse your language. And then at the last resort, it will reduce to brute power of violence in the law. And this is why in all the spaces of moving between the collective and the space and the court, we cannot let go of the structures of law and the state. We cannot let go of the places of legitimate authority that are meant to protect us, because it is very easy to give up on them and to declare the state ideologically X or Y. I don't care which regime is in power, right? You cannot let go of those because our inequality is so powerful that we will need moments where the system actually works to enforce the rules. And again and again and again, when Aruna in the book says democracy is built on process, it's not just 14, 19, 21 of chapter 3 of the Constitution. It's rule 16(1)(b) of the Criminal Procedure Code that tells you that a woman cannot be arrested without an attendant female officer after 9 p.m. And that gets you out 99 times out of 100, more than 15, 19, 21. And we all stop reading after 15, 19, 21. I'm very glad you read 15, 19, 21. But the state is in the process. And so some of this inequality is not going to be won by heroism and struggle. It's going to be won by the systems working like they should. And that's another way to pick a fight.
I just want to add something. There can be also something very daunting about Aruna's book and Aruna's life. Yeah, because I want to say this because there are young people here and we are in an urban area. Are all of us here willing to live life? She spoke about equality, right? And she said it's about you living equally. How many of us in this room are going to live equally? Do we live equally? So again, don't make a hero of her. Don't. Because it's going to be daunting. And I want to put that out there. So my question is, what are you going to do? We all live an unequal life. We live in urban spaces, which is very different. And like Gautam said, it's unseen, unspoken. It has no vocabulary. It's erased, even from our own memories. So what is our vocabulary of equality in our homes? What is it when we walk the street? How are we going to create the sense of equality, live in equality, knowing this is the conditionality of our existence? I think that's something we have to try and think about for ourselves. Which is why I said her life can be daunting. Are we all going to go to a village and live in a hut? No. You have your jobs, you're doing your own thing, you live in different spaces. So what does it mean to you in your life-changing processes to live a life of equality? I think that's what you take from this book. That's what you pick up from this book. How do I make that my life, not X's life, not a different example? Are we willing to make those changes? First of all, are we going to recognize inequality? Not just read a book. because this book should make you recognize the inequality that you are living in and must make you feel that there is something you can do to live a more equal life. I think that's very important to pick up from this book. Thank you.
I just want to add a small bit because we're all talking of vocabulary, and Aruna herself talks a lot about vocabulary which can put thought and emotion on par with each other. She's constantly trying to find out ways in which, when you're moved emotionally, how do you intellectually categorize it? So she's saying the stories of Buriya, Anshi, and Naurti, these stories should not move you just emotionally, but how do we find a vocabulary where we can put language, where we can find a language to put thought and emotion together. And Aruna herself suggests that this can happen only when you blur the personal and the political. And only when you blur the personal and the political, there will emerge a new understanding. And that new understanding will help you understand Bilkis Bano or Bhari Devi or Naurti or what happened at Shaheen Bagh. I feel Aruna is drafting a feminist constitution in this work. Yeah, I really feel so. If feminism is to disrupt social hierarchies, constitution is also about disrupting social hierarchies. And Aruna, in this work, is drafting a constitution which is feminist. Her work is filled with all these women who are asking questions. And the constitution says dignity of an individual. And who is this individual? This individual is often a male. So the female, does it embody the female? So the female is tacit, she is erased, she is unsaid. In this work, there is agency, there is voice to the woman, and the entire work is to find a language, to find a vocabulary which represents women ably.
There was somebody there, and then Sandhya, could you bring the microphone here as well, please? Was there somebody?
Hi. So my question is related to this massive inequality that we see right now, and also the justification of this inequality, especially by socially upper class groups. Especially what we see is that this dehumanization of anybody who doesn't fit, anybody who has not benefited from generations of privilege. And that mindset has kind of set, it's very strong right now, and this thing that, okay, people don't get it because they don't deserve it or they haven't worked for it. And that has kind of fed into a thing that there are some of us who deserve it and some of us who don't. So how do we break, because those people have a disproportionately large and powerful voice, whether we like it, that's just the way it is. They have a very large, very strong voice. And how do we break that discourse and try to get this idea that we don't need such a narrow triangle, that we need to kind of flatten this thing out, that would be the way for the country to go forward. So amongst that particular group, especially since they are the ones who benefited from socialism and from Nehruvian politics, from Nehruvian liberalism, so in that particular section, do we see within ourselves any way to kind of break that cycle of the poison pens and that thinking which has set in?
May I ask Krishna to take that? And can we get the microphone here? And maybe we can take a couple of questions together. So could you please, just hold off till we... Krishna, can we just get a couple of questions in all at once and then you can go for it.
Thank you. I thought I was invisible. Yes, thank you, Aruna, and thank you, all of you. The point is that I am angry, but I also have an appeal. I'm angry because our textbooks are being changed. And I'm angry because I've worked for children and written for children all of my conscious life. A.K. Ramanujan's essay was removed from the Delhi University syllabus. The social studies book for high school students was removed, I'm ashamed to say, by a Congress government. What are we doing for our teenagers? In 2029, they will be first-time voters. After that, activists. After that, leaders. After that, politicians. What are we doing for them? Who in this audience or among you have asked or looked at what is being written for children? In any language? Why do publishers not publish books that are controversial, that they are worried about? Or some niche publisher very timidly publishes the book and then hides it so that, we don't have the ED knocking at his door. This is what is happening. Have we forgotten that our 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds are going to be voters, are going to change the way our India is? How can we forget them? And why don't we do something about it?
Thank you. Maybe we'll take one more question from the lady in the front, perhaps. And then
Hi, thank you all for your thoughts today. I was wondering if any one of you all could talk about the role of the public commons in activism.
the public
The
commons.
public commons. It's
Thank
a
you. So we
vanishing
start with
space
you
and
then
the market's taking over.
Gautam can pick that after him. Should.
So if I understood your question right, it's about how do we influence the top sharp end of the triangle, right? I'm not very sure you really can change the sharp top end of the triangle. Because like he said, and we spoke about the idea of status quo, that's the sharp end that wants everything to remain as it is. So I think, which is why public action and civil society is so important, right? If you want to challenge that discourse, which is a discourse against any kind of equity or equality, we'll have to gather enough pressure on that top end, which is why collective action is so important. And I think that is where we all have a role to play, because it, again, going back to the fact that how much do we participate in those conversations as individuals, right? So I think coming together to apply pressure that things have to change. Nobody likes to give up anything they already have. And the top triangle has so much and they want more, they're not going to give it up. The reason why you have resistance towards any kind of a affirmative action or reservation is nobody wants to give up that position of control and power. Or changes in any kind of law is because it's all about power. Why is RTI a problem? Because they're giving up power, right? So you're always going to find resistance when you're telling people give up power. So then what do? Right? So the conversation cannot be about you give up power, but say we want power. Those are two different conversations. You demand your power, whatever space it may be, which is why we come together and which is why we go back to the Constitution, we go back to what we have, to use it in the most intelligent ways possible, force changes, and we demand the fact that we have these rights and these powers granted to us, which we get granted to ourselves, and that's what you fight for. Then the top triangle has no option but to move. You may not get a total buy-in, but you will force a change, and then you have a generational change that possibly will loosen at least that limited portion of what you have altered, which we have seen already in many of the ways that things have changed, right? So I think that's the way ahead, rather than saying, what do I do to make them change? I don't think that's going to work.
I just want to add, if I may. The one word that should really be on our lips is accountability. What is right to information? It's forcing accountability on a system. For all kinds of inequality, you need to have power accountable. If you question power, it's not enough. The moment you question power, it'll squash you. It'll quash you completely. So what you need is accountability. And in a systematic, legal way, you need accountability. You need to have a law which makes them accountable, mandates and forces them to be accountable. So that's why we have been struggling for the last 7-10 years almost on getting an accountability law in place. And you will not be surprised to know that nobody in power wants accountability. Nobody in power wants accountability. The Brahmins don't want accountability. In the caste system, the civil servants who are in power don't want accountability because they corner power. The politicians don't want accountability because you'll ask questions about their amassing wealth. Nobody wants accountability. And how can a democracy run without accountability? So what we should all be fighting for, if we really want equality, if we really want equal access, if we really want delivery, we want all kinds of evils addressed in our democracy, is accountability. And that's been in short supply, and I don't know why. That campaign doesn't take your strength along with it, and there are two reasons I'd like to give you, and I don't know whether you'll agree with me or not. We are victims of convenience and comfort, and no struggle for getting power to be accountable, to disseminate power, to decentralize power is possible without struggle. And struggle implicitly and explicitly means you will have discomfort. We don't want to give up convenience and comfort. So one question we'll all have to ask ourselves is, will we be able to give up these two very treasured things we have? And then anything can happen. Look at the numbers we are. If all of us pour into the streets for 3 days, look at what the farmers' agitation taught us. What did the farmers' agitation teach us? Extraordinary things. Who thought they would last out for 1 year on the roads? But they did. Of course, they made themselves comfortable wherever they went. They brought in laundrettes, and they brought in libraries, and they brought everything in. Marvelous. They also died. Many of them died. Are we willing to give it up? If we are, then if 1/10 or 1/100th of the Indian population is on the streets, no matter which government in power, they'll have to be on their knees in front of us. Well, are we willing to do it? That's the question.
On the top, sure. So I think on the two questions, on your question on language, the only thing I would add to what Krishna said is I think it is very important to be specific about how the way in which inequality is justified changes at different moments. The most dangerous thing I hear about the current justification of inequality is it's not its naturalization on the merit fight, because it's a recognizable fight to me, but it's this, because that fight has had its limits. The current elite are actually incredibly good at using the language of vulnerability to make their claims to power. And it is the most insidious manipulation, which is actually to rob inequality of its fundamental thing, which is to tell people who are suffering that they are not suffering, it is we who are suffering. And this manipulation of vulnerability as your primary logic requires, we have not responded to this. Universalism, equity, merit cannot, if the charge at you is saying, we're not saying we're better than you, we're saying we're suffering, then the language of a counter merit is not doing it. We're still answering an earlier justification of inequality. Our language is still there. The elites have gotten much sharper. They're not exerting power nakedly. They're actually claiming to be the ones. In eviction cases in Delhi, the middle class association that will file a court case to demolish the homes of the informal settlement, one of them was called the Ashok Vihar Resident Sufferers Association. Okay? And these are, but these are very sharp political strategies. When you talk about a language that gets naturalized, they don't say, give it to us, we are the Thakurs, we will take your land. See, the language of urban, modern feudalism in India, we are still feudal, but we don't sound it. And that's the time to be very, very afraid. Because the language of feudalism has warped into a very sophisticated, modern notion of saying, you're distracting us by actually talking about the vulnerable Hindu is the base of Hindutva, the vulnerable elite is the base of neoliberal development. That has to be challenged in a very specific way. So before we think about how to knock the triangle off, we have to say, what is the top of the triangle doing? What is their language? What are their strategies? And then I think we'll be better. We're also sometimes fighting back and answering the wrong question. On the question of the commons, I think actually one of the points that frames the context in which Aruna has also written is that even as the village has changed in the 40 years she's been there, the nature of the rural economy is also shifting as the urban. So these questions of inequality are also structured in, not just in India, a global moment where a kind of deep financialization of our lives has happened, right? Where everything has only one value, and it's a monetary value. Land, air, water, goods, pleasure, joy, right? So this moment is something that we are not alone in, right? And I think so to me, the question of the commons, or the question of an idea of, more broadly, public institutions or public commons, is a kind of direction that gives you another way to talk about value. And the thing about it is that it's very nascent, because what it does not have in remember, at least from what I know about, which is cities, our public infrastructures don't work as public infrastructures. To then think of a commons infrastructure that is not sort of somewhere in the middle, I think it's exactly the question we should be asking. But I don't see yet enough of, this is just me personally, I don't see enough yet of places where to build that structurally in practice in some ways. I think in rural economies, the commons is not just a concept, but an actual revenue code for a land category. And the fights about the commons are actually fascinating. So to me, I think about the possibility that I see is that because the one thing that has challenged this relentless kind of financialization, economization of our lives is the question of the environment. And to me, the possibility of the commons in the age of the Anthropocene means that this could be a way to disrupt this singular budget accounting of what is valuable and what is valued. And if that disruption can happen, then I think we can build something from the commons. But I worry a little bit about the thinking about the commons when the public itself is so fragmented, especially institutionally. That's a gut reaction.
Krishna will add to that. We'll take one last question. Do the people
There
standing...
was a question about education here.
And yes, and do the people standing here have a question? Sorry, we can't get you a seat.
All of you here. All of
yeah.
you here. You're sitting, but he's referring to
sitting.
you.
So the question on education, and Krishna wanted to add.
I just want to add to what Gautam said. Commons is something that I've worked a little bit with. So I just want to give you, in a way, it links your question and our responses to your point. So those who are not Tamil here, there is a Tamil word called porambok. It's a very fast, because it kind of links this whole question of access and what a word does, vocabulary and language. So the word porambok is a Tamil abuse word. Today you will find it in every Tamil cinema. Somebody will be called a porambok. You come to Chennai and you don't pay the auto driver right, I'm sure he'll call you a porambok. Now, porambok basically means useless, good for nothing individual. Porambok actually meant the commons. Now, it's... Yes. There are words in every language for the commons, and there are subcategorizations depending on what kind of commons you're talking about, right? But here the interesting part is, how does a word that refers to commons become an abuse word, right? That's the most interesting shift that I want to highlight. So the first shift happened because the porambok was the commons, which means it was non-taxable. So as far as the colonial regime was concerned, it was useless land because there was no tax revenue, right? Now that's the first shift, which means it's useless. Now, you also realize that the porambok has people doing so many different kinds of economic and social activities, cultural activities. And usually, the porambok is occupied by people on the margins. Occupations that you don't recognize as occupation, knowledge systems that you don't think is knowledge, all that. So along with this space, along with everything else, the people also become useless. The people also become irrelevant. People become unseen. So even a shift in meaning and vocabulary completely shifts how we perceive that space. So when we say commons, it also depends on who is saying commons. It also depends on who is owning that word. And how are you reclaiming it? So I just want to bring this because I think in a way it links these questions of language of inequality, of commons, in a way we have done it ourselves today. No, I can't sing.
Before, yeah, Aruna, the lady's question on our children and the future.
The education, you said none of us have done anything. I filed a public interest litigation about 15 years ago, and we lost it. Anyway, the point is, all this is happening to education. Like, the same thing I said about accountability, I'll say about education. If the parents of the children, and if the schools run by non-governmental authorities do not question the change of syllabi, don't ask questions of why certain particular instances have been removed from the syllabus. The whole medieval period has been eliminated in Maharashtra. You don't read about that. Raja Ramon Roy and the whole Brahmo Samaj movement has been dropped from the syllabus. You don't mention that Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated anymore in your books. But there are innumerable instances. Now the point is, and the unfortunate thing is that as a person who has been agitating on issues that are going wrong in society, I feel that there have to be interest groups that take it up. We can all hold hands, and I can speak for your movement. Medha does the NBA. I can speak for the NBA, but I can't do the NBA. She can't speak for the movements that I'm actually involved in, and the devil lies in the details. How many details are you going to find and locate? I would really say that the people of this country who benefit from schooling and all look outside, especially westwards to the US, should think about what they are doing to education. And there will be, I don't know what kinds of exams you have to pass to go to the US and UK, but there will be worse exams in which people who qualify very well in this country will be unrecognized. It will be, pardon me, it will be almost like some of the MBBS degrees that are sold in this country for a price. So if you want to be a doctor anywhere, you have to re-establish your credibility and your competence. So I think all of India should speak about it, yes. But the people concerned should make a noise. How are all these very literate parents sending their children to very good schools, not questioning the fact that the syllabus is being changed? Why are we so quiet? As a people, I'm equally agitated. But I'll file one writ, and that writ will be dismissed by, even Chandrachud may dismiss that writ, I don't know. We all seem to think he's not so bad, but who knows? What will happen when you go? It may not be Chandrachud, it may be some other CJI who then thinks that education is a non-issue. So the court is not the only answer. You have to have popular agitation and a popular understanding of why you are agitating. And I think this is lacking in this country. And I think education has become, unfortunately, a commodity. You really look at it as a commodity and a passport to making money. Nobody thinks of their child going to school as learning knowledge. It's always the end result of getting into the civil service or becoming an engineer or going to the US and earning money. That's become the target. I think that there's a lot of self-examination necessary, but we should start it sometime.
We can take one last, sorry, there. So that one question, and Nikhil Dey from the MKSS had a few words after that to close. The last question there, please.
Yeah, I'm Geeta Menon, and I've just been doing a lot of processing right now. First resolution is to go and buy the book, Aruna ji, and endless struggle, endless search still goes on for many of us, along with you. My concerns are related more to the fact that democracy and the society that we are in, the social fabric that we are in, both are very contradictory, because the kind of social fabric that is there is that of hierarchy and repulsion. This is all over. In whatever way you look at it, the entire social fabric is built up by hierarchy and repulsion. And that itself, that structure itself, is very contradictory towards what we believe as democracy. That is of the people, by the people, for the people, if you take that as a literal translation. Here in this hierarchy and repulsion that the kind of society is woven into, where are the people? You see, so when this is the state of the country, a state of the society, and many of you've spoken a lot about it, directly and indirectly, but my question to you is, because I too want to learn, the concern is, what is the key thing that can affect this hierarchical structure or this repulsive structure that has been built? Because we are seeing it in protest too. We are seeing it in, struggles at the factories, in struggles at home, where the social identity acquires a much larger form than a political identity or a worker's identity or a rural agricultural identity. So my question is that, what could be the intervention to really build a social democracy?
Thank you.
The first thing you do is to protect the Constitution. Let's keep the secular nature of the Constitution alive. Let's not allow any tampering of the Constitution. Let's interpret equality, liberty, and fraternity in the manner in which it should be interpreted. Let's take the Constitution to the people and let them understand what they're losing with the Constitution, and that without the Constitution, there's going to be no social or economic democracy left for them. We have to work very hard. And I think what we haven't done so far is take political education to the people. And I think that's where many of us, I know in this audience, are working with the Constitution. Taking it to people, we have to sit down and have these conversations with them. Because the people who will suffer from the taking away of the constitutional rights should understand what they are going to lose. I'm afraid that 15 years ago, I went to a very elite institution in Bangalore, and when I said that you must protect the Constitution, and I said, have you ever seen the Constitution? They said, no, we belong to another discipline, so we have never looked at the Constitution. Now, if you think that the Constitution is an independent amoeba which exists somewhere and that we are all living elsewhere, that is the first mistake we make. So social democracy has to begin with your understanding your rights. And that's where I think people will be most affected by the Constitution being set aside, should understand that. It's a big campaign in India. Many of us are now involved in taking Constitution to the people. I think we should begin there. It's a very complex question, so I'll leave it at that. But of course, if we have some time later, we can meet and talk. Everyone will have something to say about it.
Nikhil, you want to come up?
Krishna's one line. How many of you want to hear Krishna sing? This is participatory.
Good try. I'm just saying no one on the stage raised their hand.
My fear always, I will sing a couple of lines, I promise, but my fear always about singing when we're having discussions is that sometimes music can also do the other thing, is that you forget the conversation. No, I'm not, you will not, you never forget anything. But I'm saying this seriously. I don't mean this in a trivial manner. I mean it in a very serious manner. So I will sing, if you have a promise from all of you, that the song is only adding to the conversation today. Thank you very much. Okay, so I just have to give a background to the song. The song is, of course, starts with the word Porumboku. That's why Aruna wanted me to sing it. So the context, because it's in Tamil, for those who don't know Tamil, is it was a song that was created in 2016 or 17. Its specific context was North Chennai, where there are multiple thermal power stations, and the thermal ash was basically polluting the entire space. Over 1,000 acres of land of ash lies even today there and still being added to as I speak and as we are here, sitting here. And the lives of the fisher folk, there's a river there, the river is destroyed, the lives of the fisher folk, the health, everything, the fish, everything has been damaged. And those are the power plants supplying power to us living in the south of the city. And the song was highlighting this tragedy, and I can tell you it's only getting worse thanks to Mr. Adani, who has acquired 2 ports further north and has, I think, about 1,000 acres in the sea. And every city has localities or spaces where the worst things happen. And those are the spaces that provide us all comforts. And there is this conflict about the way we live and about the fact we don't even recognize the people who live there, right? And this song highlights that space, talks about a tragic location in terms of what we've done to it. It also challenges notions of capitalism, notions of development. And the favorite line in this song comes later, so I will not sing it. So the last verse is, Valarchi velai vaippu ellam vetti saakku, Yeri vittavanakku yeri verum porambokku. Means this whole idea of development and job opportunities is all just crappy talk. Okay? The one who sold the yeri or the lake, that was just porambokku. It was of no value. Yeri vittavanakku yeri verum porambokku. Appo neeyum naanum enna kanakku. Who are you and I? Ada neeyum naanum porambokku. That's all we are. The line before that says, if you go and ask questions to the government, guess what they'll say? This is all part of the Make in India program. Now 2 lines of the song. Porambokku unakku illa, porambokku enakku illa, porambokku oorukku, porambokku bhoomikku, porambokku unakku illa, porambokku enakku illa, porambokku oorukku, porambokku bhoomikku, porambokku un poruppu, porambokku en poruppu, porambokku oor poruppu, iyarkaikku bhoomikku, porambokku unakku illa. Porambokku doesn't belong to you. Porambokku enakku illa doesn't belong to me. Porambokku oorukku, it's for everybody. Porambokku bhoomikku, it's for the land. Porambokku un poruppu, it's your responsibility. Porambokku en poruppu, it's my responsibility. Porambokku oor poruppu, it's our responsibility. Both for nature and for the land and for the people. Thank you.
So you can't possibly forget your responsibility with that song. I just would like to first thank on behalf of everyone, firstly all of us for turning up in such large numbers and beginning so many conversations today. So I'd like to give ourselves a hand first. Really is patiently wonderful set of conversations. Thank the BIC for making it happen. So really, let's give them, and to make these events happen, how much tension goes on for many days, many of us know. And they do it finally very smoothly and with great grace, so thank you. Thank you, of course, to the people here, Akar, Deepa, Aruna, Gautam, not Aruna, Gautam and Krishna. But we are not going to just leave you with good conversations and thoughts. The title, in case you forget, was called From Thought to Action. That's what we hope each one of us here will do. We've had a set of conversations with ourselves, with each other, amongst ourselves. We hope we can move towards action. And in that, it's often that we don't know exactly how we will do it, or many are involved in it. One thing we'd like to do, and it's not that we'll necessarily respond to that, there have been chits that some of you have got. If you haven't got it, just do take out 2 minutes extra on your way out and fill up if you want to keep connected, which doesn't mean that we will do it. We will connect you with many other people who we know are engaged in certain kinds of things. It'll take us a little time, but we will do it. That's the idea. I will also take another minute to talk about something, because actually, interestingly, I've been through now 4 or 5 conversations, such things around this book. Today, less was perhaps talked about the right to information, but that's one area where each one of us have benefited phenomenally, and each one of us can really be foot soldiers and leaders for that, protecting all that's around it, transparency, accountability. Many are here. There is a thing that we in Byawar, the place where the right to information was born, it has just become a district headquarters, and last year the municipality of Byawar, which by the way was BJP dominated, took a resolution asking the MKSS and the School for Democracy to take land and build a museum to the RTI. So 1 hectare of land was allocated, which is a lot of land, and we want to make it both a people's museum and a living museum. So not just a museum to the past, which we will of course put on record, but to all our ongoing struggles where RTI is, or transparency and accountability is an essential part. So this is an open invitation to all of you to please also there say that can you, because this is something that's actually, we don't know of any other such place in the world, leave alone in India. Can we all contribute in some way, some in time, some in thought, some in action, all in action, some in money as well. So because it's not going to be easy to build that, and we don't want it to be one person, one kind of thing. It really is too valuable a thing. It'll take its time, but we'll build it. So do also please, on your way out, in that say that particularly on the RTI Museum, if you would like to contribute and how, and we would like to do that along with you. Once again, thanks very much for the time that you've had here, for the time that we've managed to have with all of you. And we do hope, we sincerely hope that the personal becoming political is something that we can see as part of the process of thought to action. That's what will make Aruna's book, I think, live far longer and far beyond the people who even read it. Thank you.